So, hi everybody, I'm Dan Sherman. I'm here to talk about the end of game ownership and how the subscription model is disrupting mobile games. So I'll start with, very importantly, who am I and why should you care? So I've been working in the game industry for 17 years, spanning AAA console, PC, mobile, premium, free-to-play mobile. The common theme is I've always been on the business side, and I have always been working with independent developers to build successful partnerships that yield games that are really fun for people to play around the world. At EA, I was behind a handful of big deals, including the ones that launched Rock Band to the world, also Titanfall from Respawn, the creators of the Call of Duty franchise. Those two franchises together collectively generated over $3 billion in revenue. I left EA in 2011 to start Tilting Point, with the aim of building essentially flipping the traditional publisher-developer relationship on its head, so that rather than developers providing services to publishers, it was the other way around. So Tilting Point today is a top 100 grossing mobile game publisher that has stayed true to that model. A couple of years ago, 2018, I started GameClub, which became the first mobile game subscription on iOS. So this presentation is really the business perspective into how and why subscription is disrupting mobile games. So here's a look at the game subscription landscape today. This spans also console, mobile, and PC. It also it spans both streaming and non-streaming. So this is an important distinction. People talk about streaming and subscription as if they're synonymous. They do often go together, but actually more often they don't. So the majority of multi-game subscription offerings in the game industry are download-based, not streaming-based. And the two biggest success stories so far are Xbox Game Pass and Nintendo Switch Online, both of which are download-based. Collectively, they have about 20 million subscribers, so they are truly success stories. By comparison, PlayStation Now has about 1 million subscribers. So all that is streaming is not subscription, and all that is subscription is not streaming. GameClub fits in here in the middle, so we are mobile focused. We are live on iOS since our global launch, which was last October, and we're currently in beta on Google Play, launching globally on Google Play very soon. We are 100% download based. Our games are pretty small binaries, they're easy to download, and they are fully playable without an internet connection. Here's a history of multi-game subscription. So I'm going to touch on a couple of things here. Importantly, a lot of these companies that I just showed you did not exist 2 years ago, including GameClub. So there's been a tremendous amount of activity in the very recent future. I get asked every once in a while, if subscriptions are going to be a thing in mobile games, why hasn't it happened yet? And there's an easy reason for that, which is that it wasn't allowed. So the things I'm going to point out here is that it wasn't until 2016 that Apple even announced that subscriptions were going to be allowed in games on mobile. And about 18 months later, they quietly did some major tightening of the restrictions in their guidelines that pared back what was going to be allowed and what was not going to be allowed, especially as it pertains to games. GameClub got started after that. Our first submissions to Apple with our service were in 2018. We succeeded in going live in soft launch as the first multi-game subscription on iOS, but it wasn't until 127 rejections and a lot of iteration and improvements before we were able to go global with our global launch in October. So by the way, things have gotten better since then, but it's important to note that the road to even being allowed to do this on mobile was a bumpy one. Okay, so let's take a step back from the game industry for a minute, because I think it's useful to understanding what's going on with the subscription economy is largely, broadly defined outside of games. And what we have here on the right is a index of revenue from about 300 subscription-based businesses around the world across industries. And the revenue growth of those companies compared to the S&P 500 index, so 500 large companies across industries publicly listed in the U.S. What this shows is that the growth in revenue from those companies on average year on year has been 5 times greater for subscription-based businesses than non-subscription-based businesses. On the left, we see the impact that that has had on the app economy outside of games. So the growth in non-game apps, consumer spend, has been pretty dramatic. In fact, last year, 2019, the growth in non-game app consumer spend was double that of mobile game spend, which, as we know, is large and growing still. 5 years ago, only 2 of the top 5 grossing non-game apps had subscriptions. In both 2019 and 2018, all 5 of the top grossing apps use subscriptions, and in fact, according to the App Annie report that came out last week, fully 97% of consumer spend in non-game apps, out of the top 250 non-game apps, was from apps that had subscriptions. So it's been a pretty dramatic impact across the world and across industries, which gives some perspective on what's to come in games. So here's the big, hairy question. We've established that subscriptions are already huge on console, as is proven by Xbox Game Pass and Nintendo Switch Online. We've also shown that subscriptions are huge in non-game apps. So another question that does come up is, why do we need subscriptions in mobile games when everything's already free? We kind of live in a pretty unique business model that has driven a tremendous amount of growth on its own. So I'm going to use the rest of this presentation to answer that question, because it's not an easy one, and it's not an obvious one. But here's where we start. So we begin by taking a deeper look at the Free-to-Play Rulebook, as illustrated by my favorite episode of South Park. Free-to-play games, as a general rule, I'm going to do some broad generalizations here. That rulebook for success requires that games are built with compulsion loops and restriction mechanics. So it's a combination of those 2 things. The games have to be infinitely playable, and they have to have enough roadblocks frequently along the way to motivate an infinite amount of consumer spending. So with these 2 things coloring essentially all that is successful in mobile games, we see the impact that that kind of has. Again, speaking in generalities, what this shows here is that there are major limitations to what can work as free-to-play. So having been at the helm of a mobile game publisher that specializes in free-to-play, I can tell you that the rule book that we learned early on was that avoid games that can be completed. Avoid games that are overly skill-based, because so much of monetization comes from creating that illusion of skill, but in fact you're only progressing on the basis of time and money spent. Avoid games that are for kids. Why? Because kids aren't whales, and kids can essentially only monetize through ads because they don't have credit cards. So again, avoiding these are large categories of games that can be and have been proven to be very fun on mobile devices, but as a rule you have to steer clear of them in order to be successful on free-to-play. So the result is this sort of extreme homogeneity of the top grossing charts, and essentially what is, I believe, is setting in as freemium fatigue. So I just want to take a minute to talk about just how awful some of the ads have become. I know this is a little bit unfair, and I don't want to piss anybody else off that's in this industry. And the first thing I should say is I get it. I'm now running my second mobile game company. I understand the importance of user acquisition, and I understand the importance of ad revenue. So a lot of my perspective into this is also colored by myself as a gamer and as a parent of young gamers, and looking at the experience that my kids go through today, growing up playing games on mobile devices relative to my fanboy Nintendo days of the 1980s. And I feel bad for them, honestly. The ads are getting a little bit out of control. I could spend hours on this, but you could find an awful lot more, much worse ads than these that are real on-device ads at the shitty mobile game ads channel of Reddit. This one here I captured on my own phone while playing a kid-oriented game with my 8-year-old daughter. So I know it's not just, the internet that is displaying these things. And by the way, I also know that I'm not the only one who has a problem with this or thinks that it's a problem. There's been a lot of changing public sentiment around some of these manipulations and abuses that are sometimes perpetrated in the free-to-play mobile business. There are government investigations into some of these tactics, which I believe in some cases have merit, and I think most of us who work in the industry kind of understand that as well. Why do we put up with it? Number one, it's pervasive, it's everywhere, it's sort of something that we've become a little bit desensitized to, but also, there's a lot of money being made and a lot of jobs that depend on the freemium model and ad revenue, and really, to date, there has not been an alternative to this that makes economic sense. So it's one of the reasons we put up with it. So I'm going to try to boil down a little bit further the differences between what we call a premium game and what we call a freemium game without using the traditional one's paid and one's free. Premium games, in an oversimplification, are games that are just designed to be fun, games that you play, whereas freemium games increasingly are playing you, the consumer. And going a step deeper, really sort of bifurcating this entertainment experience that we call games. By design, what are the differences between premium and freemium? And the more kind of you study this, you realize that premium games, they're designed just purely to entertain. They're free of interruptions. They're experiences that people schedule into their lives. The motivation behind those play sessions is an intrinsic one. It is based purely on what a person finds fun and entertaining. And in that way, they resemble home entertainment. Freemium, as we've touched on, it's a little bit more along the lines of diversions that people use to fill in the cracks of their day and other things that they're doing throughout the day. There are extrinsic motivators, which are designed to shorten your session lengths but get you to check in regularly as if you're checking your email or something, under a sort of sense of obligation that's introduced artificially beyond just the game experience. So they tend to be a little bit more of an endless grind, and a lot of the tactics that are used and a lot of the strategy behind these games, which I'm not knocking, has driven a tremendous amount of growth in our industry. But they do come from the casino business. And so if you look at games as splitting down the middle, whether it's console, PC, or mobile, I believe that there is this gigantic divide that has happened. And one of these categories of games, one is not canceling out the other, one does not even necessarily compete with the other. I think they're just two totally separate things. One of them resembles home entertainment, and one of them resembles casino entertainment. And when you look at home entertainment, that business has shifted tremendously towards a subscription model. So the point of what I'm getting at here is that subscription provides an alternative to premium games that previously hasn't been economically viable through that upfront payment model, which was never very successful and in fact has been in decline for many years on mobile. So subscription provides this service-oriented approach to monetizing those games that don't have a chance of monetizing through free-to-play. Subscription also has the ability to provide a better user experience. This is a lot of the inspiration for GameClub comes out of the enhancements to user experience that Netflix and Spotify have trailblazed. So the ability to eliminate ads, eliminate in-app purchases, exclusive content, personalized recommendations, new games all the time is part of the value proposition that we believe strongly in at GameClub as a potential to develop this market. How does it work? So from the standpoint of monetizing, the big concept here is network retention. So as opposed to attempting to monetize retention from an individual game, which if you're a premium game, the games are not designed for long-term retention, especially if you could complete it in a couple of hours. What subscription does, by bundling together a portfolio of premium games, we monetize retention across the entire portfolio. So what that does is introduce a new revenue stream and a very scalable revenue stream for premium games. How do you keep users coming back and partaking in that network and providing that network-wide retention you need to monetize? Well, discovery is a key part of that, and constantly getting your users to discover new game experiences in the way that Xbox Game Pass does. So this is a really important point, and has been proven that Xbox Game Pass subscribers play 40% more games and 30% more genres, and 91% of them play titles that they would not have played without Game Pass. By the way, Spotify, very similar statistics. About 50% more songs are consumed by Spotify subscribers, and about 40% more artists are discovered through that particular service, along with other music streaming services. And in the case of GameClub, there's actually content that we're providing that would not be available otherwise. It wouldn't exist if not for this model. So, moving into other categories that are represented by sort of like, you know, the categories that were left behind by freemium, anything that can be completed. You won't be able to monetize that as a freemium game. Does that mean it won't be fun? Does that mean you can no longer save a princess? No, with subscriptions, you can. Those games can be monetized. Preserving lost classics is something that GameClub is perhaps best known for. But that's another category that is well served by subscription. The in-betweeners, imagine being able to design games purely because they're fun, not worrying about trying to shoehorn a game that is you know, in its heart premium, but it's trying to take advantage of freemium economics. Normally that doesn't work out very well. With subscription, it can. It's also a better model for kids because you can eliminate the ads and in-app purchases, and a lot of those annoyances that that characterize the existing experience of today, and provide something that parents and kids can feel good about. And it's not, again, you know, there's actually research to support this. This is a recent Super Data report that polled parents, ranked multi-game subscription #1 on the chart. By the way, single game subscriptions are quite unpopular by comparison. There's a lot of exciting stuff here. I'm not going to talk about this because it's some of the sophistications around the investments and scale that is required to pull off subscription with games and other industries. But it's an important thing to note that there's actually a lot of investment that's required to get it done. The good news is that a lot of companies are already making that investment, including GameClub, Apple Arcade, Google Play Pass, to name a few. The way we approach this, understanding that these are pretty big competitors, I think what we're offering is quite complementary and quite differentiated. As a rule, all of the content in each of these offerings is mutually exclusive, but like Netflix and Spotify, GameClub is platform agnostic, so we span platforms. We also have some cool features that we're developing in the GameClub app, as opposed to having it just be embedded in the App Store. And we have a pretty unique value proposition for the developers and the game creators that we work with. So on that, I think I will stop and open up for any questions if you guys have it, but we have, you know, quite a lot of developers have signed up With our help, these games are being brought back to life and monetized through our shared subscription, and in fact maintained by GameClub's own development team. So happy to answer any questions if you guys have them.
Thanks, Dan. We have time for one question.
Why were you rejected 127 times by Apple?
Why? Not 127 different reasons, but close to that. I shouldn't say that it was all some guideline or rule that we were somehow running afoul of. Some of those were, glitches, but I would say the bulk had to do with the ambiguity that existed not only in the guidelines, but in how the guidelines were being interpreted by app review. So, it's an industry transforming model, and we've seen the impact that it has had on music, on TV, on a number of other industries. So I think the implementation of that from the platforms has been one of caution. My read from the outside is that it took a while for them to understand internally what they were going to be okay accepting and what they weren't. And so we were on the receiving end of that because we were early adopters of this model, and it just required a lot of trial and error. Okay, well, thank you all very much, and please download the GameClub app and check out our website.